When I first bought the house on Maple Ridge Drive, I thought I'd finally found a place where my family could breathe. After years of city noise, traffic, and the constant grind, the quiet edges of this suburban neighborhood seemed like the answer to prayers I hadn't even spoken out loud. The house was older, but sturdy, with a wraparound porch where I imagined morning coffee and a backyard big enough for barbecues, late-night conversations, and my daughter's future kids to play. At least, that's what I thought at the time. But there was something I didn't see, something hidden beneath the polished lawns and spotless driveways. I should have known the moment I noticed how every mailbox looked exactly the same, as if they'd been cloned. Or the way the grass on every lawn was cut to the exact same length, like someone had taken a ruler to it. It wasn't just neat, it was controlled. At first, I chalked it up to suburban pride. People here cared about appearances. Fine, I could respect that. But the more I settled in, the more I noticed the little signs, rules tacked onto bulletin, boards near the community pool, notices stuffed into mail slots, and neighbors who spoke with the same tight, clipped politeness you get from someone who's watching every word. It was only after a week that I met the self-proclaimed queen of Maple Ridge Drive. Karen. Karen wasn't just a neighbor, she was a force of nature, the kind of person who never simply said hello, but instead sized you up like you were a piece of fruit she might return to the store if it didn't meet her standards. She was in her 50s, with a haircut so sharp it looked like it could cut glass, and she carried herself with the certainty of someone who had never once considered being wrong. The first words out of her mouth when she spotted me unloading boxes weren't a welcome or an introduction. They were a question. "Have you filed your HOA paperwork yet?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" She gestured toward a neatly stapled packet she was holding. "Homeowners Association. Everyone in Maple Ridge is required to join. Rules, dues, community, standards. You'll need to sign and return this by the end of the week." I glanced at the packet, then back at her. "I wasn't aware this was an HOA neighborhood when I bought." Her lips tightened. "It is. You can't live here without being a member. The association ensures everything runs smoothly, keeps property values up." I wanted to laugh. The house was already mine, paid for. No one had mentioned anything about a mandatory HOA at closing. I told her I'd look it over, but deep down, I already knew I wanted nothing to do with it, and neither did my daughter. Now let me tell you about her because she's the reason this entire story exists. My daughter Rachel had just turned 30, and she carried herself with a kind of calm authority that made people sit up straighter when she entered a room. She had sharp eyes, a steady voice, and a way of standing her ground that I knew she hadn't inherited from me but from the years she spent wearing a badge. She wasn't just tough, she was the sheriff of our county. But here's the thing. Rachel didn't flaunt it. When she was off duty, she was just my daughter, a woman who loved old Western novels, grilled chicken on summer nights, and the quiet of country roads. She wanted to live a normal life on her own terms, which is why, when Karen came strutting up with that packet of HOA paperwork, Rachel's response was about as calm as you could expect. She picked up the packet, skimmed through it, and frowned. "Dad, they're charging monthly dues for things we'll never use. Tennis courts? I don't even play tennis. And this clause about mandatory approval for exterior modifications? That means we'd have to ask permission to plant flowers? In our own yard?" Karen's smile was tight. "It's about community harmony. Everyone has to play their part." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Or what?" That was the first time I saw the crack in Karen's polished demeanor. Her voice dropped, half an octave, and there was an edge of steel in it when she answered, "Or there will be consequences." That moment, standing in the driveway with a packet of papers and a threat hidden behind a fake smile, was when I realized that this neighborhood wasn't just neat, it was dangerous. We didn't sign, and that's when the war began. At first, it was small things, anonymous notes left in our mailbox about the unsightly garden hose we'd left coiled on the side of the house. A complaint about the color of Rachel's truck parked in the driveway. It was apparently too aggressive, a shade of red. Someone even went so far as to take photos of our lawn and tape them to the community bulletin board with the caption, "Non-compliant yard care." Rachel brushed it off. "Bullies only win when you give them attention," she said, but I could see the irritation building behind her calm exterior. Then came the fines. Envelopes slipped under the door demanding payments of $150 here, $200 there, all citing vague infractions like failure to maintain community standards. We ignored them. We never signed up, never agreed to be bound by their rules. But Karen didn't take rejection lightly. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the neighborhood in shades of orange and pink, Karen herself marched up to the porch. No packet this time. No fake smile, just anger. "You think you're better than everyone else?" she snapped. "You think you can live here without respecting the rules?" Rachel crossed her arms. "We own this property outright. There's no legal obligation to join your HOA. End of discussion." Karen's face turned red. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with fury. "You'll regret this. No one defies me. No one." The words hung in the air long after she stomped away. I could tell Rachel was unsettled, though she wouldn't admit it. Weeks passed, and the tension only grew. Neighbors who once waved politely now avoided eye contact. Cars slowed when they passed our house, drivers staring like we were zoo animals. It wasn't just an HOA anymore, it was a cult, and Karen was the high priestess. The incident that would change everything came one quiet Saturday morning. Rachel was standing in the driveway sipping her coffee when Karen appeared again. But this time she wasn't carrying papers. She wasn't spewing threats. This time she was carrying a gun. The morning it happened felt deceptively ordinary. A soft breeze drifted through the neighborhood, rustling the freshly trimmed hedges that lined Maple Ridge Drive. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically across the street, sending arcs of water glittering in the sun. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower hummed steadily, its drone mingling with the distant laughter of kids riding their bikes. It was the kind of suburban calm that hides everything rotten beneath it. Rachel was in the driveway, sipping from her chipped coffee mug, the one she'd carried with her since her academy days. She liked her coffee strong, black, and unflinching, much like the woman herself. I was inside sorting through bills at the kitchen table when I heard it. The unmistakable crunch of heels on gravel. Karen. She didn't come alone this time. 2 board members from the HOA trailed behind her, clipboards in hand, their expressions carved in stone. It wasn't a neighborly visit, it was a procession, an intimidation tactic. I stepped out onto the porch just in time to see Karen stop, at the edge of our driveway. She didn't bother with greetings. Her voice was sharp, slicing through the morning air like a whip. "This is your last chance. You will sign the HOA agreement, you will pay your dues, or you'll find yourself living a very difficult life in this neighborhood." Rachel didn't flinch. She just took another slow sip of her coffee before setting the mug on the hood of her truck. Her stance was casual, but her eyes were locked on Karen with the kind of controlled patience I'd seen her use on dangerous suspects. "Karen," Rachel said evenly, "for the 100th time, no, we're not joining. We're not paying. And we're not subject to your rules. This is private property. You have no jurisdiction here." The words were calm, final, unshakable. And that's when Karen snapped. Her hand went into her oversized purse and came out clutching a small black pistol. The movement was quick, almost rehearsed. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to freeze. The bird stopped chirping, the breeze died, and all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. Karen raised the gun, pointed it directly at my daughter. "You think you're above us?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You think you can just ignore the rules?" Nobody ignores me. Nobody disrespects this community. If you won't play by the rules, maybe you shouldn't be here at all." The board members behind her shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered, "Karen, don't—" But neither stepped forward. They were complicit, silent, watching. Time slowed. My body screamed at me to move, to shout, to do something. But before I could, Rachel did what Rachel always did. She took control. Her voice was low, steady, commanding. "Karen, put the gun down." But it wasn't the words themselves. It was the way she said them. The kind of tone that carried the weight of authority, of someone who'd faced down armed suspects before. The kind of tone that could cut through panic and force compliance. Karen's hand shook, but the gun stayed aimed. "Don't you order me around. You're nothing. You don't run things here. I do." Rachel took one slow step forward, palms, slightly raised, eyes locked on Karen's. "You don't want to do this. I promise you, whatever you think you're proving right now, it'll end badly for you. Put the gun down." The silence that followed was suffocating. The neighbors had started to gather at a distance, whispering, watching, their morning routines interrupted by the spectacle unfolding in our driveway. And then, with a movement so quick I almost missed it, Rachel's hand shot forward. In one practiced motion, she twisted Karen's wrist, wrenched the pistol free, and had it safely in her own grip before Karen even realized what had happened. The gun clattered against the hood of the truck, and Rachel pressed Karen back with the sheer force of her presence. Karen stumbled, gasping, red-faced with humiliation. You can't do this to me. I run this neighborhood." Rachel leaned, in close, her voice low enough that only Karen and I could hear. "You just committed felony assault with a deadly weapon, and you pointed it at the wrong person." Karen blinked, confused, as if the gravity of what she'd done hadn't sunk in. And then came the reveal. The moment that would change everything. Rachel reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge. The silver glint caught the sunlight, blindingly undeniable. She held it steady, right in Karen's face. "Sheriff Rachel Miller, you're under arrest." The gasps from the neighbors rippled like a wave. Karen's knees nearly buckled. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. For the first time since we'd moved here, the queen of Maple Ridge Drive looked powerless. Rachel snapped the cuffs on her with an efficiency that spoke of years of training. Karen shrieked, sputtering about rights and respect and "how dare you?" But it didn't matter anymore. The mask was gone. The power was gone. And for the first time, the HOA was afraid. The sound of Karen's shrieking carried down the entire block. Even as Rachel guided her toward the patrol car she'd called in from her radio, Karen's voice pierced the morning air like broken glass. "This is harassment. You can't arrest me in my own neighborhood. I am the HOA president." The irony of it was almost laughable. Here she was, handcuffed and trembling, being loaded into the back seat of a cruiser with the entire neighborhood as witness. And still, she thought her title meant something. Still, she thought the letters HOA carried more weight than the silver star on Rachel's chest. But the neighborhood knew better now. I watched from the porch as neighbors gathered in tight clusters on the sidewalks, whispering, gasping, clutching coffee mugs like lifelines. These were the same people who had once turned away from me, who had once treated Rachel like an outsider for not falling in line. Now their eyes darted between Rachel's badge and Karen's cuffed hands with something new. Fear. Not of Rachel, but of the realization that the tyrant they'd followed had just crossed a line there was no coming back from. One man, Jim, the board treasurer, stepped forward, face pale as milk. "Sheriff, this was a misunderstanding, surely. Karen was just upset. You don't really mean to—" Rachel cut him off with a stare so sharp it could have cut steel. Mr. Thompson, I witnessed her point a loaded firearm at a private citizen. At me. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a felony. Jim swallowed hard, retreating back into the crowd. Karen, meanwhile, was still thrashing in the back seat of the cruiser, her voice muffled through the glass but no less venomous. You'll regret this. All of you. I own this neighborhood, but... The more she shouted, the smaller she seemed. Rachel's deputies began taping off the driveway, taking statements, snapping photos. Every step was methodical, professional, and utterly humiliating for Karen. I couldn't help but notice how the same neighbors who once looked at us with suspicion were now lining up, almost eager to talk to the deputies. It was as if Karen's downfall had given them permission to admit what they'd been too scared to say. She threatened me once over my garden, one woman whispered to an officer. Said she'd fine me $500 if I planted roses without approval. Another neighbor leaned in. She's been pocketing HOA money, raised the dues last year and never explained where it went. Like rats abandoning a sinking ship, the stories poured out. All at once, the perfect facade of Maple Ridge was cracking, and underneath was rot. Rot that Karen had cultivated and the HOA had enabled. Rachel moved among them like a storm given human form, calm, precise, unstoppable. Every statement, every complaint, every hidden truth was being gathered, documented, built into something bigger than just the morning's assault. When she finally returned to me, her jaw was set, her badge glinting in the sun. Dad, she said quietly, this isn't just about Karen anymore. The whole board's complicit. This HOA isn't just corrupt, it's criminal. And in that moment, I saw the sheriff take over fully. The next few days were chaos. Karen's arrest spread through the county like wildfire. The local paper ran a front-page story. HOA president arrested for assault on sheriff. The news stations followed, showing grainy cell phone footage of Karen being shoved into the cruiser, her face twisted with rage. For the first time, Maple Ridge wasn't a shining example of suburban order. It was a scandal, and with scandal came collapse. The board tried to hold emergency meetings, but no one showed. Dues went unpaid. Residents who had once bowed to every ridiculous rule suddenly stopped mowing their lawns, stopped repainting their shutters, stopped caring. The spell was broken. But Karen, even from jail, refused to let go. She called members, threatened lawsuits, claimed the sheriff's department was conspiring against her. She even managed to hire a lawyer, one of those bottom feeders who thrive on chaos, to argue that her arrest was politically motivated. Rachel didn't flinch. She knew the law was on her side. More than that, she had evidence, witness statements, recorded threats, a weapon seized. It wasn't just her word against Karen's. It was the community's word against years of tyranny. Still, the HOA board clung to its power like drowning men grasping at driftwood. Notices continued to appear, in mailboxes demanding fines and dues as if nothing had changed. They thought they could intimidate us into silence. But they didn't realize the war had already shifted, because Rachel wasn't just my daughter anymore. She wasn't just a sheriff defending her father's home. She had become the reckoning Maple Ridge never expected. One evening, about a week after the arrest, I stepped onto the porch to find Rachel reviewing files on her laptop. The glow from the screen lit her face in the fading twilight, casting her in equal parts warmth and determination. "They're finished," she said without looking up. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "The HOA. I've got enough complaints, enough financial discrepancies, enough evidence of harassment to dismantle the entire board. By the time this is over, Karen won't just lose her position, she'll lose everything, and the rest of them will go down with her." I felt a swell of pride then, mixed with relief. For weeks, we'd lived under the shadow of this HOA, under the threat of Karen's rage. And now, finally, the tables were turning. But Rachel wasn't smiling. Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. "They made one mistake, Dad. They thought they could threaten us into submission. They thought they could threaten me. And now, she closed the laptop with a soft click. Now I'm going to make sure no one in this county ever tries it again. The war wasn't over. It was only beginning. The court date was set for a crisp Monday morning. By then, Karen had spent nearly a month alternating between house arrest and mandatory hearings, her empire shrinking with every passing day. But still she fought. Still she spat venom at anyone who would listen, insisting the HOA was her kingdom and that she was its rightful queen. But kingdoms fall, and on that morning, Maple Ridge Drive was buzzing like a hive. News vans lined the streets, reporters clutching microphones, cameras pointed toward the courthouse steps. Neighbors who had once hidden behind their blinds now gathered openly, whispering with barely contained glee. For years, Karen had wielded her HOA like a weapon, dictating, fining, humiliating. And now they were here to see her crown stripped away. I stood among them, watching my daughter walk up those courthouse steps. Rachel wasn't in uniform, but she carried herself with the same unshakable authority. In one hand, she held a case file thick with evidence. In the other, she carried the calm certainty of a woman who had already won. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The HOA board sat stiffly in the front row, eyes darting between Karen and the judge. Karen herself looked like a storm barely contained, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. She wore her defiance like armor, but beneath it, I saw the cracks. The twitch in her jaw, the tapping of her foot, the restless flick of her eyes toward Rachel. When the proceedings began, the charges were laid out one by one. Assault with a deadly weapon, threatening a public official, extortion through fraudulent HOA fines, embezzlement of HOA funds. Each count hit the courtroom like a drumbeat. Neighbors shifted in their seats, murmuring. Karen's face flushed deeper with every word. Then Rachel took the stand. Her testimony wasn't fiery, it wasn't dramatic. It was steady, precise, every word carrying the weight of truth. She described the morning in our driveway, Karen's gun, the threats, the arrest. She backed it with statements from neighbors, photos, and recordings, every detail dismantled. The illusion Karen had built. But it wasn't just the gun incident that sealed Karen's fate. It was the money. Rachel's investigation had uncovered years of mismanagement. Inflated dues, unexplained withdrawals, invoices for services that were never rendered. The HOA wasn't just corrupt. It was Karen's personal ATM. And now, in front of a judge, the paper trail was undeniable. Karen's lawyer tried to spin it, painting her as a passionate leader who had been misunderstood. But the jury saw through it. So did the judge. When the gavel finally came down, the verdict was clear. Guilty. Karen was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 2. The HOA board was dissolved by court order, its accounts frozen pending restitution. And just like that, the monster that had haunted Maple Ridge was gone. The aftermath was almost surreal. Without Karen's grip, the neighborhood transformed. The rules that once strangled every resident were thrown out. Neighbors planted gardens, painted shutters, parked trucks in their driveways without fear of fines. The sameness that had defined Maple Ridge gave way to individuality, to life. One evening, a few weeks later, the community gathered for the first time without Karen's shadow looming over them. Families brought food, kids played freely, and laughter filled the air. Someone even suggested forming a new neighborhood association, not to control, but to support, a group built on trust instead of fear. Rachel was the guest of honor that night, though she didn't want the title. She mingled quietly, shaking hands, accepting thanks, but always redirecting the praise. "I just did my job," she said. But to everyone there, it was more than that. She hadn't just enforced the law. She had given them back their freedom. As the night wound down, I stood beside her, watching the glow of string lights dance across the yards. "You know," I said softly, "when we first moved here, I thought we'd made a mistake. I thought this place was poison. But now it feels like home." Rachel smiled faintly, sipping from her ever-present coffee mug. "Sometimes it takes a fight to make a place worth living in." I looked at her then. My daughter, the sheriff, the woman who had stared down a gun in our driveway and refused to bow, and I realized Karen had been wrong all along. Power doesn't come from titles. It doesn't come from rules or threats or the illusion of control. Real power comes from standing your ground, from knowing who you are, from refusing to bend when the world tries to break you. Karen never understood that, but Rachel did. And because of that, Maple Ridge would never be the same.